Good afternoon. It is noon, and it's the third Thursday, and it's time for Bites and Bits of History here at Tyler History Center, brought to us in part by the John and Loretta Hines Foundation. And welcome everybody to Tyler History Center on behalf of the board and staff and volunteers and members of Mahoning Valley Historical Society. My name is Bill Lawson. I'm Executive Director of Mahoning Valley Historical Society, and it's always a pleasure to see lots of people here for our Bites and Bits of History program. So, a little housekeeping before we get started with today's speaker. On the tables, first of all, if you don't have a Bites and Bits bonus card, please see Linda over there at the table. And what you can do is if you get all 5 of the stars stamped, it will be $5 off. If you want to get a membership in Mahoning Valley Historical Society, or if you're already a member, you can have $5 off on a purchase down at the gift store in the first floor here at Tyler History Center. So it's a valuable thing to have, and please check it out if you don't have one already. As you notice, this year we're leading up to the 150th anniversary of the founding of Mahoning Valley Historical Society on September 10th, 1875. And we've geared our whole program here toward that, including the series we're doing with Bites and Bits of History, but we have a lot of programs coming up in the summer, and falling under the History on Tap or the History to Go programs that we do every summer. And there's a flyer on the tables too that tell you about what's coming up in June, July, August, September, and October. Some perennial favorites are the Amazing History Race, 10th edition, which will be Friday, August 8th. And we're moving our Founders Day annual open house, which will be here at Tyler History Center, to Friday, September 5th, so it can be the focus of the First Fridays program that happened here in downtown Youngstown throughout the 4 months of the year. And then we have our ever popular Oak Hill Cemetery tours, which will be Saturday, October 18th at Oak Hill Cemetery, a very historic and interesting place here just outside of downtown Youngstown. So please take that, put it on your refrigerator, and hope to see you at these events. There's also a schedule for the Mahoning Valley Cultural Alliance. We're telling stories of immigrants to the Mahoning Valley, and the next program coming up will be on Monday, June 2nd. And Stories of Immigrants, this will be about India, people who came from India and Asia and have settled here in the Mahoning Valley. It starts at 5 p.m. and it'll be at the SLN Temple in Girard. And if you see Linda, she can give you more information and an address about that if you are interested in coming to the program. And I didn't mention already, in the immediate near future, on Thursday, June 12th, we will have our History on Tap Trivia Night. We'll be sponsoring Trivia Night at Noble Creature Brewery and Tasting House, which is in an old church on East Rand Avenue, formerly Butler Memorial Presbyterian Church. And we hope to see you there on Thursday, June 12th. Also on the tables, there is a survey that we're asking you to complete for us and give us some feedback on what we're doing. We would very much appreciate to hear from our audiences what you like, what you don't like, what you might want to see in the future. So please take a little time today to fill out that survey. And for our members, on Tuesday, June 17th, we will be having the MVHS annual membership meeting and Historic Preservation Awards program here at Tyler History Center starting at 5:30. And this again is our 150th membership meeting, annual meeting, so it ties very much into our celebration this year. You should have received, or should be receiving, your invitation very soon. And please make reservations to be here, to do what the members do, which is to elect people to the board of directors, hear reports, and then anything else that might come up. And then the Historic Preservation Awards. We have 5 awards coming out this year. I won't tell you what. You'll have to come to the meeting and find out. But that'll be advertised pretty soon as well. And then looking ahead for Bites and Bits, our meeting in June will be on Thursday, June 26th. Now, that is the 4th Thursday of the month, and this is possibly the first time we've ever broke away from the 3rd Thursday, but Thursday, June 19th is a federal holiday that we'll be observing, so we're moving it to the 4th Thursday of the month on Thursday, June 26th, once again in this room. And we'll be exploring the 1960s, 1970s in the Mahoning Valley through media. So there'll be some audiovisual moving pictures and a lot of other things to see, to look at where we were as a community in the 1960s and 1970s. Connie Jones, who is the project manager for Stewart Media Archives Center, will be our presenter in June. So enough about that. Let's talk about today's program, which is titled All Shook Up, Reshaping the Steel Valley in the 1950s. And our presentation today will come from Mahoning Valley Historical Society's museum educator, Dante Bernard. There he is. Dante is a graduate of Youngstown State University's Honors College in 2023. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and is a member of Phi Alpha Theta, the National History Honor Society. Dante has been with MVHS since September of 2023, working as a museum educator. He came to us with experience working both as a camp counselor and a student employee at the Youngstown Historical Center of Industry and Labor, otherwise known as the Steel Museum. During the 2023-2024 school year, Dante presented more than 300 programs to more than 5,500 students throughout the Mahoning Valley. He will exceed that this year as well, as we're looking to possibly 6,000 total students served by our outreach programs. And his work helped secure for MVHS a Local History Outreach Award in 2024 from the Ohio Local History Alliance. Outside the classroom, Dante's role here has grown, and he assists in other projects, special events, walking tours programs, and our summer youth programs, and also research and writing. And he's been one of the participants in our weekly program that we do with the Vindicator called This Week in History. And you probably see that usually in the first section, but it's a nice story going back 100, 110, 115, 125 years. Always interesting to see how it's presented, and Dante is taken up very much with that and doing well. Coming up in this September, he will co-present a workshop at the American Association for State and Local Histories annual meeting in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'm very happy to introduce Dante Bernard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out. Again, my name is Dante Bernard. Very clearly, we have a lot of things coming up. Coincidentally, a lot of things happened in the 1950s, right? So, we'll just segue right into it. We have a lot of stuff that I want to get through. It's going to be a lot of fun stuff, right? It's going to be a lot of interaction in this, too. So, I'm going to be asking some questions. Feel free to just shout out and answer if you know. So, to really get us started off, welcome to the second half of the 20th century, right? So now we've officially reached the middle point when it comes to the 20th century. Things are going to start to change, right? We are seeing like a new frontier in a way. So at this point, after the Second World War ends, right, America is taking on a position in the world as a defender of democracy. And we're seeing this in a lot of official documents. A lot of things that the United States is starting to participate in. Right, so after the Second World War ends, the United Nations is formed. The United Nations Charter says that all members of the United Nations, in order to contribute to the maintenance of international peace and security, undertake to make available to the Security Council on call its arms and military forces. The NATO Charter, which the United States joined in 1949, says they are determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Right, so we are now, in writing, agreeing to being a defender of democracy worldwide. And so by the time we get to the State of the Union in 1950, President Truman is seeing this as that kind of tipping point, right? We are at the middle now. He says, as we move forward into the second half of the 20th century, we must always bear in mind the central purpose of our national life. We do not seek material prosperity for ourselves because we love luxury. We do not aid other nations because we wish to increase our power. We have not devised programs for the security and well-being of our people because we are afraid or unwilling to take risks. This is not the meaning of our past history or our present course. We work for a better life for all, so that all men may put to good use the great gifts which they have been endowed by their Creator. We seek to establish these material conditions in life in which, without exception, men may live in dignity, perform useful work, and serve their communities and worship God as they see fit. And you notice right over here, right, in the year 1950, this is our flag. What's different about that? The stars, right? We only have 48 stars. In 1950, we are still only 48 states in this great union. That's probably going to change at some point during this presentation. It might change. So, also wanted to quote Truman from his State of the Union address. I found this very, very powerful. He says, "The human race has reached a turning point. Man has opened the secrets of nature and mastered new powers. If he uses them wisely, he can reach new heights of civilization. If he uses them foolishly, they may destroy him." Right? And so this is the attitude in which I kind of want to move forward into this decade. So, starting off here, we have a nice little aerial view of Youngstown. I know it's kind of hard to see, but right about there, you can see the example of the cathedral. So this is a real nice picture, right? Again, pretty small, but to zoom in and get a little bit of a closer look at some of the stuff we might be seeing here. So right here at the top left, we have a view of West Federal Street. This right there, peeking out in the back corner, is the old Ross Radio Building, or where you're sitting right now. Right now, the Tyler History Center, and this building right in front of it, that is where your car is parked. Okay? So, pretty neat to kind of see how that all changed. But also here too, we have a nice view facing east on East Front Street. And we have South Avenue Bridge right over there. It's really cool to see how that tri line changed. One thing that I think is super, super cool, especially with this one, is that there's not a lot of height, right? So we still have a lot of development that we're doing moving forward. This next one over here, right, we have the Palace Theater. Metropolitan Tower, all right? Very, very fun. Just some cool, spice of life. And so, as we start moving forward, I want to take a look at some of the population data, right? So going from 1940 to 1950, we look at both censuses, we don't see too big of a change either way. And if we look at the national average, this isn't a unique problem. So in the 1920s, we saw almost 15% increase in population. 30, we saw 16%, but in the 1940s, we only see a 7% increase. In Mahoney County, we see a 6.9% increase. Of course, during the 1940s, we see the Second World War. And so, looking at some more specific data, what really kind of jumped out at me when I was looking through the census, the group that was most affected by change were men aged 15 to 24. They saw a negative 25% increase to population, right? So it's being able to see that in the numbers. It stands out. Another thing that really marks the 1950s is the flight to the suburbs, right? The growth of the suburbs. And so, going from 1950 to 1960, we see a very different story. So there is a massive change. So, from over these 10 years, Mahoney County sees a 16.6% population increase in total. But it's not evenly spread across the board, right? So Boardman gains 13,773 citizens. That is a 101% population increase. Austintown, where I grew up, it gained 12,138 citizens, 121% increase. Poland with a 44% increase, Antelope with a 63% increase. Youngstown with a 1% decrease. Right? So this is taking into consideration anybody who passed away, was born, or moved. So this is the first time where we see over those 10 years, the population of the inner city decrease, and it's going to continue from there. Another thing too that's really, really interesting is that decrease is from 168,000 to 166,000. Nowhere near that many people in Youngstown anymore, so I couldn't even imagine. But this kind of helps me imagine a little bit. So this is a picture of some people waiting to go home from work. Right? These are all people waiting to get on the buses. So over here on the right-hand side, I believe everyone over here is waiting to go to Morgan. All piled up. Over here on the left-hand side, people jamming themselves with that bus. There is not an inch of breathing room in there, but they're cramming on. It says there's always room for one more. And then this over here, this is a double line wrapped around the courthouse with people waiting to get on the bus to go back to Portland. So, kind of gives you the idea of where did all those 160,000 people fit? They didn't.
What year was that?
This is from 1950. This is from 1950. Speaking of 1950, 1950, so the first year of the decade. So, what I'm going to do when we reach every decade, we are going to do a little trivia, right? So if anybody is up on their movie knowledge, their music knowledge, or sports knowledge, feel free to jump in. So, in 1950, the Academy Award for the Best Motion Picture went to, does anyone know?
Greatest story ever told?
No. 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 All the King's Men. All the King's Men won the Best Motion Picture Award in 1950. Okay. What about sports? So the NFL championship game in 1950. Anybody know who played in that game? Okay. Who else? Browns and Rams, right? So we got half of it. We got half of it. Very nice. Very nice. Here's a round of applause for that one. I promise it'll probably get a little bit easier as we go on. So, to start us off in 1950, the blizzard of 1950. So, in this blizzard, we saw a total of 29 inches of snowfall. Those 29 inches of snowfall came in 71 uninterrupted hours. And for those 3 days, business came to a complete standstill. The mills closed down, the schools closed down, lost millions of dollars. It says, for the first time in its 83-year history, the Vindicator was forced to suspend publication. No papers were printed Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. So even the Vindicator had to shut down because of this blizzard. And as you can see, 7 people actually lost their lives in the blizzard, be it from injuries because of the snow, some of exposure, and just not being able to get to a hospital too is going to play a factor in that. And so, right, life still needs to go on even though there's snow everywhere. So over on the left-hand side, these are 4 gentlemen that just completed a 6-hour journey to get milk to the hospital. Took them 6 hours to get just 3 ounces down to the hospital. And then over on the right-hand side, the bread truck just opened its doors and started selling bread out of the truck. Right, so you can't make it to where you're going, but we still need bread, we still need milk. And even though, right, business shutting down, people are losing their lives, people are still finding time to have fun in the snow. It's on the bottom left, or the bottom right down there, see some kids. It says, a platoon on Norwood Avenue stands ready to defend its position against their enemy. Up here, we have a picture of a mother and her daughter walking to get some groceries, nice and bundled up. Right, so people find time to have fun. But over here, this picture, so that is Isley's storehouse. During the blizzard, 4 tons of snow found itself on the roof of that storehouse, and the roof collapsed. So in this picture, it's kind of hard to see, but that big pole sticking up, that is being pulled down by a truck. So this picture is of a truck pulling down the kind of dilapidated building. Over here on the right-hand side, there's a lady trying to get into her car. Completely buried. It says, see the radio antenna. Just barely sticking out. And then my favorite picture I found of the blizzard is of this gentleman. He says, I have to dig it out if I'm going to work. So, I'm sure we've all felt like this during the winter, right? But the snow clouds actually pushed the snow up against his car. So, if I were him, I would be very upset. But kind of zooming out, all right? So, leaving Mahoney County, going to a national scale, putting this in perspective. As we get to the 1950s, America is facing a not-so-new enemy. Right, so in the Second World War, we defeated the spreading threat of Nazism and totalitarian fascism throughout Europe. But now back at home, right, we are refocusing on the communist threat in Dauphin County. And so a lot of this is going to be jump-started, like when Aldrich was found guilty of 2 counts of perjury. He was on FDR's State Department, and he lied in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. So even though he was only charged with perjury, he could have been charged with espionage if they found it out a little bit earlier. The statute of limitations had run its course, so not guilty for espionage, but guilty for lying. So he's put in prison for 10 years, he's fined $4,000, and he's branded a traitor. Over here, taking it local, there's an article out of the Vindicator where 3 Briarville men are chased out, handing out leaflets for the Youngstown Communist Party. One thing about this that I thought was super interesting is that the address for the Youngstown Communist Party is at 250 East Federal Street. For anybody who does not know, 250 East Federal Street is the address of the new building that we just acquired for our storage site. So the former IBM building was the home of the Youngstown Communist Party. Very interesting. Not only is this enemy at home, but this enemy is also abroad. Entering the 1950s, we start the decade by going off to war. Not really war, a conflict. Right? Congress never voted to go to war with Korea, and this wasn't really an American war in Korea. This was a UN war led by General McCarthy. Right? And so, on June 25th, 1950, the North Korean army, who's supported by the Soviet Union, of course, is going to cross the 38th parallel and invade South Korea. Immediately, President Truman reaches out to the United Nations. They form a resolution to fight back against this. So General MacArthur leads an amphibious assault on the Battle of Incheon. UN efforts effectively push the North Korean army back beyond the 38th parallel. Things are looking good. Things are looking too good because they don't stop pushing until they push the North Korean army all the way to the Chinese border. At that point, the Chinese get nervous and they then supply 250,000 well-armed troops to the North Korean cause. At that point, it's going to be pushing back and forth against each other. So listed here are just some of the names of the individuals that fought in Korea from the Hunter County. Listed within this list, there are 2 women, which I thought was pretty interesting. And these are a few pictures of a few of those soldiers that are listed. There's not too many pictures that I was able to get out of the Vindicator of anybody that was serving. And I'm sure that's not too big of a surprise considering that Korea is often called the Forgotten War. So, take a little break for brevity as we enter 1951. And so, in 1951, topping the Billboard year-end chart is Nat King Cole with what song? I haven't heard it yet. Too young. Nat King Cole with Too Young. Okay. Maybe any baseball fans in the room? Okay. 1951 World Series. Okay, I heard Yankees. Who did they play against? I heard it somewhere over there. The Giants. 1951's World Series. The Yankees versus the Giants. And the Yankees won. So right back into it. To start 1951, General MacArthur is fired. This comes from a lot of butting heads. Truman is seeing the Korean War as an opportunity to stop the spread of communism into South Korea. right? Seeing this as the position of America as the defender of democracy worldwide. MacArthur does not see it that way. He sees it as the perfect opportunity to liberate North Korea from communism. So, MacArthur tells, they're at the 38th parallel at this point, kind of, it's a standstill, nobody's winning. So Truman tells MacArthur, we are going to hold out to try to make a truce. We're going to hold out for truce. Do not keep fighting. Do not keep fighting. The same day, MacArthur fights. He leads an invasion over the 38th parallel. Within the same day still, Truman is on the phone with MacArthur telling him that he needs to come back home and he is fired. But it's also worth saying here that after MacArthur invades North Korea, we still have 2 more years before the conflict ends in a truce. So I have to wonder if he did not ignore Truman, if this could have been ended a little bit earlier. February 27th of 1951, the 22nd Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed. 22nd Amendment says that no president can serve more than 2 terms, or more than 2 years on top of 2 other terms, right? So a total of 10 years in the White House. But it is worth saying that they grandfathered in Truman. They said that this does not apply to Truman because when he was elected, this was not, right? This wasn't on the books. Let's see if that matters. On July 11th, 1951, the Moondog House airs for the first time in the WJW, hosted by Alan Freed. So if that name sounds familiar to anybody, Alan Freed was most popular for popularizing the term rock and roll. Right? So he was the king of the Moondogs on his TV, on his radio show, The Moondog House, where they played mostly R&B, blues, jazz, and because of this radio show, the phrase rock and roll spread to, or not infamy, but it spread into fame, right? And he's one of the biggest reasons why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. And then to kind of wrap up 1951, which also opened in 1951, was Edward Marlowe's Bourbon Plaza. So these are a few pictures that we have. This one up here in the top right, I snagged up from somebody on the internet, but I do think it is a great side-by-side, right? Especially if you look at this picture on the bottom left. I have never seen that many cars in Bourbon Plaza, ever. And that really shows over here when there's only like 6 cars in that picture, right? But it is really, really cool to see how similar it looks. When I was on Street View the other day trying to find exactly where this picture was taken, the sidewalk is the same shape now. So yeah, 70 years later, it still looks the same. Just that the storefronts look a little different and not so many cars. So as we enter 1952, the Academy Award for Best Picture goes to I'll give you a hint. Gene Kelly. Oh, artist. American in Paris. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, jumping back to the NFL Championship game 1952.
Detroit in that?
Yes, Detroit did play.
Cleveland?
Against Cleveland. Very nice, very good. So Detroit played against Cleveland. Detroit won this time. So this is where most of my research went into, because this is probably Youngstown's biggest time in the limelight during the 1950s, and that is with Youngstown G2 versus Sawyer. So, a little bit of background leading up to it. So, after the end of World War II, the National Security Act was passed, what the National Security Act created were these four departments within the executive branch. We have the National Security Council, which still exists, the Central Intelligence Agency, which still exists, the Department of Defense, still exists, and the National Security Resources Board. Not as self-explanatory as the other one, but what this basically did was it managed labor during times of war, right? It existed to make sure that there were no disruptions in the supply chain and to handle any issues between laborers and management. So we start moving into 1950 with the Korean War starting. We see the passage of the Defense Production Act. What this creates are two offices, or it creates the Office of Defense Mobilization, which then creates a couple of offices, including the Office of Price Stabilization and Wage Stabilization Board. Okay, with all that being said, so the Office of Price Stabilization, their whole purpose was to stabilize the prices, right? They were setting the prices of steel, they were setting the prices of manufactured goods. The Wage Stabilization Board was setting wages. So this was at a time when the government was setting wages. And so what this makes the conflict start to look like is you don't have laborers versus management anymore. You have laborers, the government, and management all at each other's necks. It's so in 1952, the beginning of 1952, the United Steelworkers of America threatened a strike. So they threatened a strike for April 8th. The main reason behind this was because they saw just how important they were for the economy during the Second World War. And they were noticing that these companies were continuing to get more and more work and make more and more money, but their wages were not representing that. So they were threatening to strike for an increase in wages. Management did not want to cooperate with them, so the government gets involved. And the government says, okay, well, we are setting the prices with the Wage Stabilization Board, so do it. And they don't want to. So there's a lot of fighting back and forth with the steel industry and the government until we hit April 8th, and no concessions have been met yet, and so they go on strike. So at this point, the beginning of the day, right, they already have 40,000 people locally ready to be out of work. Another 25 to 30,000 people ready to not show up to work. They already, within the day, lost between 17,000 and 18,000 tons of pig iron and 55,000 tons of steel production. Right, so within one day, they were able to do this much. I thought this was a really nice picture. Indicated. And so, once the mills go on strike, Truman immediately issues an executive order nationalizing steel. He claims the steel industry for the government, and he gives the Secretary of Commerce orders to issue to the steel industry. Within the same day, the steel industry has their lawyers in court in DC to issue a restraining order on his executive order. And so they go to court, and the court rules against Truman. So the court rules that the steel seizure is illegal, and after that, an automatic strike is back. So once the executive order goes out, the steel mills are nationalized, the strike ends. But as soon as that is withdrawn, the strike is automatically put back into effect. I will say the management is going to be very upset by this because, according to the Taft-Hartley Act, which came out in the 40s, dealing with labor and management relations, they said they have to have a 99-day, hold-on period before you, after you announce your strike and you go on strike. So they tried to say that they have to wait another 99 days before they're allowed to strike again. this does not get solved for a few months. But what's really important to recognize here is that, so six judges voted on the side of Youngstown Sheep 2. Truman appointed 4 Supreme Court justices. So 2 of the justices that voted against him were appointed by him. Right? So this was not an easy decision. Truman himself did not want to use the Taft-Hartley Act because he disagreed with it. He said it's a disgusting piece of legislation meant to target workers' rights. And so it was less about what the right thing to do is and how can we go about this hurting the least amount of people. So they spend the next 2 months in the newspaper telling their side of the story, telling what the strikers want, telling what the government is trying to do to reach a concession with management. It is not until July, so 2 months later, almost 3 months later, that the bill strike ends. It ends mostly in favor of the union, but it's not exactly what they're looking for. This whole time, management's hiding behind the idea of they're asking for a union shop, and just dangling that in front of them, dangling that in front of the papers, and they have to spend these next 2 months kind of fighting that idea. To close out 1952, we get the last president that we'll get for the 1950s, with Dwight D. Eisenhower being elected. So just very quickly, we're going to go back to what we said earlier in the year, when the 22nd Amendment was passed and Truman was grandfathered. Truman withdrew from the race because he had a 22% approval rating by the time election time came around. So everybody was pretty much done with him. And I think he was glad to kind of step back and take a breath. There was a lot of fighting these last couple of years. So enter 1953. Talking to Billboard's year-end charts is Percy Faith with I understand if you didn't get this one. The song from Orange. What about the 1953 World Series? Yankees, okay. Oh, I think I heard it. The Dodgers. The Yankees won. Right? So, starting in 1953, the war is over. It ends with a truce, but everybody's still on guard. Right? There's no winner. It is hopefully the other side stays loyal to the party. Also in the same year, right, coming back home, the Rosenbergs are executed. So anybody who does not know, the Rosenbergs were arrested and charged with espionage. They were accused of sharing nuclear secrets with the Russians. They were Russian immigrants. And they are the only 2 individuals who were ever executed under the Espionage Act during peacetime in America. So in total, they were both charged with 11 counts of breaching the Espionage Act. Jump straight into 1954. This is a pretty big year for Youngstown. The Academy Award for the Best Motion Picture goes to... Perfect. From Here to Eternity. Very good. I think it's on the north side of the building. Anybody recognize or know what this building is? That's St. Columba. That's St. Columba in 1868. Why did I do a picture of 1868? Well, I wanted you to see what it looked like at first. Because this is what it looks like when it's rebuilt at the beginning of the 20th century. Very beautiful building. A nice interior shot. And very, very pretty. But of course, in 1954, St. Columba's burns down. And it is a massively destructive fire. Here's an aerial view. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see directly into the top of the church there. Looking inside, there's a picture of the back of the altar after the fire. And then this next picture I thought was really moving. So, of course, a lot of damage. But, as we all know, we have a beautiful cathedral now. So, right here I have a picture of the old Market Street Bridge. So I don't have much on the Market Street Bridge, but I just thought this clip was really cool. I was able to pull out of our digital archives. Also in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was handed down, which bans segregation in schools. And actually, Saturday is the 71st anniversary of the passing of the Brown versus Board of Education. So, pretty neat, pretty cool. 1955, the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture goes to On the Waterfront. Very good. And the 1955 World Series was between two teams. I think I heard both of them. The Yankees and the Dodgers again. And the Dodgers won this time. So, in 1954, the polio vaccine was created. This headline here was from April of 1955. And this is a nice indicator headline of when 250,000 doses of the polio vaccine were sent into Ohio. Right, so 1955 is when we start seeing polio start to get eradicated throughout the state, which is very cool. But also, in 1955, we see this gentleman rise to journalism prominence. So, for anybody who does not know, this man is Simeon Booker. So, Simeon Booker is a journalist who was born in Baltimore, Maryland, but moved with his family when he was 5 years old to Youngstown. Grew up in Youngstown, graduated from South High in 1937. This is actually a yearbook picture. We have his signed yearbook in the archives. Right over there on the far end. And he attended Youngstown College. He was the first black journalist to work for the Washington Post. And Simeon Booker reached huge success. So he started writing with Jet magazine after he had left the Washington Post. He started writing with Ebony not long after that. But the main reason why Simeon Booker is going to rise to prominence is because he is going to start covering things that other white media sources are not going to be covering. So starting in 1955, we start seeing the first initial launching off points of the civil rights movement. So Simeon Booker starts his journalism career with Jet by going down south to Mississippi, to the town of Mount Bayou. Mount Bayou, they are holding a voting rights rally. So after the passing of after Brown versus Board of Education was handed down, they have a voting rights rally where they're registering African Americans to vote throughout Mount Bayou, and he is down there reporting on that. It is from Mount Bayou where he hears of the death of a boy named Emmett Till. So he comes back down to Mount Bayou, and he is interviewing people locally. He goes up to Chicago for the funeral. He is the only journalist at the funeral, himself and his photographer. And the funeral was initially supposed to be a closed casket funeral because the damage that was done to Emmett Till's body was so horrible that they did not want anybody to see what he looked like. But his mother demanded that it be an open casket funeral because the world needs to see what racism did to her son. And it was at that point that Simeon Booker's cameraman took a picture of Emmett Till. That picture was published in Jet magazine after a lot of going back and forth on whether or not this was an ethical thing to do. Ultimately, they decided that it was, because this was important for the world to see. A lot of people attribute that picture of Emmett Till to the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. So, Sidney and Booker, hugely important. Another thing that we don't really see a lot, and I wasn't able to find in any of the Armstrong indicators, were anything talking about the Montgomery bus boycotts. Montgomery bus boycotts went on for 13 months. Right, this started on December 1st when Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat. And it wasn't until 1957 that the boycott's going to stop after it is declared unconstitutional to segregate transportation. 1956, topping the Billboard year-end chart is Elvis Presley with I think I heard it. Heartbreak Hotel. Alright, Elvis Presley is entering the scene. NFL championship game of 1956.
Not the Browns.
Not the Browns. Not the Browns. Giants was one of them. The Bears. Right. So the Giants beat the Bears 47-7.
45.
So this was a really cool picture that I found out of the indicator. This is the Paramount Theater in 1956. A huge line of people wrapped around the building. When does that happen? How often does that happen anymore? But this is a really cool full-page picture of a bunch of young people lining up to go see the movie. So also in the same year, 1956, the Interstate Highway Act is passed. And came right through Youngstown, of course. So we're going to see a lot of things start to change topographically around here. But this is a map out of the Vindicator of the planning for the highway for the interstate. Right, so registry through there, and before it's even built, they are drafting routes that can come off of that highway to go down to Columbus and Cincinnati. So people are very hopeful for the interstate. And right here, we have a nice little pamphlet put out by the Ohio Turnpike on how to take the turnpike. Which is super cool. It's not really something I would think about, right? You need instructions for, oh, you need to get in the left lane if you're passing, and, you know, only go slow if you're in the right lane. So, pretty cool. This is a copy of a green book from 1956. So, we actually, almost every year, the 1950s, we have a green book in our collection. So listed here are hotels and restaurants that would be safe for African Americans to visit if they were passing through Youngstown. So I think it's really cool to be able to go year by year and see which businesses popped up, which ones are still standing, right? So pretty cool stuff. 1957, topping the Billboard's year-end chart is Elvis Presley with All Shook Up, right? The name of the presentation. Also, super fun fact, this is the last year that Billboard has a year-end chart, because starting in 1958, it becomes the Billboard Hot 100. 1957 World Series game. Yankees was one of them. Any ideas? The Braves. So Milwaukee versus New York. Milwaukee wins. So also happening in 1957, we have the Little Rock Nine. Right? So after Brown versus Board of Education is handed down, after we see the Montgomery bus boycotts, we see schools becoming integrated. And so this is a Vindicator headline from September 24th. nearing the end of a lot of the conflict with the Little Rock. The same year, Russia launches their satellite. So Sputnik 1 is launched. Very, very cool. In 1958, the Academy Award for Best Motion Picture went to... That's it, that's the one. The Bridge on the River Kwai. Very nice. NFL Championship game in 1958 was big between...
Colts versus the Giants.
Perfect. The Colts versus the Giants. Very good. So, as we reach the end of the decade, Youngstown isn't really taking as big a role in national media anymore. Actually, 1955 was the beginning of the downturn of the steel industry in Youngstown. 1955 was the last peak in steel sales. From that point, every consecutive year was lower and lower. But in 1958, the government creates a couple new agencies, including NASA, which is awesome. I love NASA. And also, NORAD is created. If you don't know much about NORAD, how else would we be able to track Santa Claus? Right? So, thankfully, because of that. But, to bring it home a little bit, in 1958, the Edsels, out of Camel, Ohio, released Grandma and the Ding Dong. Right? So, this is their hit single, of course, and references Grease, so many songs I can't even count, right? So definitely putting us on keeping us on the world stage, even though we're starting to get some eyes turned away from us. In 1959, we have the first ever Grammy Awards. The first ever Grammy for Song of the Year went to which song? You might know the song, but you might be thinking of a different artist. It's not. That is Domenico Modugno with No Blue Into the Blue for Polaris. Right? And of course, my favorite version of the song is by Dean Martin, also from Ohio. Right? The 1959 World Series was between
White Sox and Dodgers.
That's it. The White Sox and the Dodgers. Very good. Yeah, 50 cents, right? We saw it go from like 5 cents to 35 to 50. So it's going up. Inflation is really. So on January 2nd, Castro ends the Cuban Revolution. Batista flees the island, and Castro is put in charge, lasting until, it was 2016, I believe. So, definitely very, very impactful. Also, this is saying the communists are getting closer, right? So, not only are we still facing that at-home threat, but we are seeing that foreign threat get closer and closer to our borders. And then, like I said, what happened? At the very end of the decade, we get our 49th and our 50th states. There was a period of about 7 months in between these two, so I really feel bad for anybody who bought a flag between January and August. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up by showing you this beautiful picture of 2 bear cubs that were born sometime during the 50s at the Berlin Zoo. It has nothing to do with Youngstown, found in the Vindicator, but it's 2 bear cubs. How can I not show you? So, thank you very much for coming Do you have any questions? Yes.
Was the steel strike in 57?
I think there might have been. I can't say for certain. But If it was definitely a lot on a much smaller scale, of course. And I don't think it was against sheep too. But I might be totally wrong. But I think it is possible that later in 57 it was. Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Yes.
We were talking about sitting on the walker.
Yes.
And we have that picture
Mhm.
here with the, jet. This is also my other, article about rented. What year does that take?
I'm actually not totally sure when that picture was taken. I just want to. Oh, yeah. So this would have been sometime during the 80s. Yeah, this was when Reagan was president. Of course, thank you. Anything else? Yes, what was it?
Nothing about Maryland Road.
Yeah, I did not have anything about Maryland Monroe. I will tell you, there was so much stuff to filter through for this. So there's just so much that I couldn't even narrow it down. So I was adding stuff until about 2 hours ago. So, but yeah. Well, sorry. Yes.
Mike's ditch. Lake River Snap.
Okay.
That was to save us.
Okay.
However, Mike did the Intercoastal Waterways Act, which anybody that's been on a ferry on the intercoastal water system, you can think,
All right. And what year was that? Do you know?
I don't know, the 50s,
Okay. Sometime in the 50s.
later in the 60s.
Okay.
I can jump in on that.
Oh, yeah, if you know the answer, absolutely.
You're referring to Congressman Michael Kerwin's, what was called the $1 billion ditch. And after World War II, he and local industries and Chamber of Commerce were advocating through the federal government to build a lake-to-river canal for the port of Lake Erie and also the Ohio River. The main thing being that they all realized that transportation costs were higher to come inland than they were for, say, well, even on the Ohio River watershed, Pittsburgh and whatnot, and Mingo, but especially the companies and plants that were located on the Great Lakes. And as Kerwin's influence and power grew in Congress through his long term, he made his way up to the Appropriations Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee, and he was chair of that. And in that capacity, despite massive opposition from other regions of the country who didn't want to see that amount of money spent in northeastern Ohio, he did get to the study phase of it, where they were actually looking at plans for routes where they had the feeder reservoirs, et cetera. But he was never able to push through appropriation to actually build the canal. And so that was late 40s, 50s, 60s. And he was in his prime as a congressman in the 1960s. And even at that point, he couldn't push it through.
Thank
To close us out, I do want to say again, thank you very much. As far as I know, I believe I am going to be hosting the trivia night at Noble Preacher. So I might see some of you there. That is
June 12th,
June 12th. June 12th at Noble Preacher, right behind the main library
6 o'clock.
at 6 o'clock. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.